let's move on to the actual flow of the case. We aren't even talking about how to solve a case yet. This is just the process of a case. So basically, the key steps you would typically go through when solving a case. Okay, so the first step is to understand the question and the objective. At the beginning of the case, your interviewer will read you some kind of situation or problem, like the example I gave you earlier. There's this global manufacturer who is experiencing declining profitability, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. Sometimes it's intentionally vague to make sure that you know how to ask the right questions or to see if you can apply your business judgment. While they're explaining the problem, you'll write down the most important points that you pick up. And then you'll have an opportunity to do two things. First of all, you'll repeat the problem back to them. And this is to make sure that you've understood it properly and can fill in any gaps that you have, so it's totally fine if you miss something. Then you'll also ask clarifying questions that you'll need to help you structure your thoughts and ultimately solve the case. The video on the BOLT method helps with this step and provides a guide to ensure that you're asking the right questions and basically that you're picking up the key bits of information. The second step is generating a hypothesis and creating a structure. The reason I like to use a hypothesis is because it focuses your structure. The hypothesis goes hand in hand with your structure. Let's say the objective is to increase profitability. Your hypothesis would essentially be what you believe the very high-level solution could be to achieve that objective. And then based on the hypothesis, you can then create a structure. If that all seems kind of abstract and vague, it'll become clearer when we go through how you actually do it in our generating a hypothesis video, so don't worry about it. So, your structure is basically your roadmap to solving the case. At the beginning, you will identify the key areas that you need to analyze in order to solve the problem. Let's say the problem was declining profitability, and the goal, therefore, was to increase profit. Obviously, you need to look at revenue, and you need to look at costs, because those are the only two things that come into profit, right? By analyzing these buckets, you could then come to the solution of how, in fact, to increase the profit. Then the third thing is presenting your structure. I separate this out from creating a structure because I want to really highlight how important this aspect is. In our bank of mock case interviews, you'll see the importance of presenting your structure clearly, as it can really make or break a case. It's one thing to have a really amazing structure that you've written down on a piece of paper, but the only way your interviewer will know how good your structure is through how you communicate it. You're not going to write on a piece of paper and pass the paper over to them. You'll write it down, you'll think about it, and then you'll present it. This whole idea of being structured is not just about structured in your content. It's also about being structured in how you present yourself and making sure that they can follow your train of thought really clearly. Then, once you've presented your structure, you'll start the analysis. So, let's say in your structure you have a few buckets that you want to analyze. The process of analyzing begins with prioritizing. Basically, choosing the bucket that you want to start with, For example, you might choose to start with costs rather than revenue based on the case. So that's prioritizing. Then analyzing. If you were doing a deep dive into costs, you would ask for the relevant information on costs, such as a breakdown of fixed costs and of variable costs. You might then be given some kind of chart or graph, which you would quickly absorb and analyze. All analyze means is that you're drawing insights and spotting trends in that particular piece of information. You might look at the graph and see that, for instance, in 2014, there was like a huge increase in cost or something like that. And then you could tie that back to the original problem of declining profits. So that's all that analyzing is. Within that, though, you would also synthesize. So once you've analyzed and drawn insights from the information you have, you would do a mini conclusion of that bucket. For example, from this graph, I can see that costs rose heavily in 2014, which likely contributed to the declining profits that our client is facing. Then you just prioritize the next bucket and repeat the same process again. And this is also a good way to really leverage your structure. You don't want to just make a structure in the beginning just for the sake of it and then abandon it. It needs to act as like your roadmap through the case, So one way to remain structured throughout the case is to use your structure and those 3 main steps. But of course, as you get more advanced, this becomes much more of a general guide than a hard and fast rule. But it's a really great tool for when you're starting out and can help keep you really grounded throughout the case. Then the last step of the case process is the recommendation. So once you've analyzed all of your main buckets or analyzed enough of those buckets to answer the original question, the interviewer will normally just say, okay, could you please prepare your recommendation or something along those lines. And that's basically just you adding up all of the information that you've uncovered and all the insights you've derived from that information. The recommendation will be based on the original problem and objective, and it should also be communicated in a structured way, just like everything else that you've done. Structured in the beginning, structured throughout, and then structured at the end. In our next videos, we'll be taking a deep dive into what all of these steps actually mean and how you can become a pro at every single one of them.